A rabbit! Who's interested in a rabbit? Is this what you've been scratching around for, sister?
Yeah.
Are you really surprised,
Oh,
though?
I'm all excited. Oh, my.
Let us take a chapter from the life of this lovable personality. His devotion to others, his self-sacrifice.
How sickening can you get?
Tell us about your life, Bugs.
Oh, I'm so unimportant. Easy, stomach.
This is a special report from ABC News.
Good morning. I'm Barry Serafin in Washington. The city of Los Angeles, along with the rest of the country, is awaiting an announcement at this hour from the jury in the federal civil rights case stemming from the beating of Rodney King 2 years ago in Los Angeles. The trial judge has asked the jury to come in at this hour. ABC's Judy Muller is in the courthouse in Los Angeles, I believe, on a phone. Judy, what can you tell us?
The jury has just been called in. The judge said before calling in the jury that they had reached a unanimous verdict yesterday, that they requested to go back to the hotel, put their things. They are being seated now. The jury is in the courtroom. The judge is greeting them. I will tell you about the verdicts as they come down. But you'll just have to be patient with some of my pauses because we are reporting this as it happens. They've reached a unanimous verdict. The judge says, this is Judge John Davies.
Well, that at least ends speculation of a hung jury after a week of deliberations.
Right. He's now asking the foreman of the jury to hand over the verdict. He's referring to the jurors by their number because, as you know, these jurors have remained anonymous. He's now handing the verdict to the clerk of the court, Jim Holt, who will read those verdicts. And, of course, this is the moment that everyone has been waiting for all week. They've taken him out of the envelope. He's asking the clerk to read the verdicts now, and Mr. Holmes will do that. Mr. Holmes is now reading the verdict.
United States of America versus Stacy C. Coon, case number CR 92686.
He's reading the indictment.
We the jury.
We the jury.
The following title cause. Find the defendant, Stacy
Coon.
guilty.
Guilty. Stacy Coon. Guilty. Count 2 under color of law. Stacy Coon intentionally allowed unreasonable force during the arrest. Stacy Coon, Sergeant Stacy Coon, the supervisor in charge at the scene, guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. All the jury members are saying that they agree with that verdict. Guilty, Sergeant Stacy Coon, the supervisor in charge at the scene that night. We move on now to count 1, which is the other 3 defendants, Powell, Wind, and Bursino. Lawrence Powell.
Case number CR 92686.
Verdict.
We the jury and the following title cause. Find the defendant,
Lawrence Powell. Guilty.
Title
Lawrence Powell guilty of willfully using unreasonable force and violating Rodney King's right to be free from unreasonable seizure. That's 2 guilty, Sergeant Stacy Coon and Officer Lawrence Powell. Guilty of aiding and abetting.
1993 at Los Angeles, California, signed by the jury person, juror number 483.
Not guilty of aiding and abetting.
After been then read as to defendant Lawrence M. Powell, the verdict of each of you. So say you one, so say you
Guilty. Lawrence, no, we're still on Lawrence Powell.
United States District
We are moving on now to the other defendant.
In the matter of the case entitled United States of America versus Timothy E. Wand,
Timothy Wind,
legal jury in the above entitled cause find the defendant, Timothy E. Wand,
Timothy Wind,
guilty
not guilty of violation of
United States Code
Title 18, unreasonable force. Timothy Wind, not guilty. He was the rookie on duty that night. Not guilty of aiding and abetting. So Tim Wind has been acquitted of everything. Tim Wind, the rookie, the jury has decided is not guilty. Lawrence Powell was split, but he is guilty of excessive force, not guilty of aiding and abetting. However, it doesn't matter. He's guilty under count 1. So we have 2 guilty verdicts, 1 acquittal. Moving on to Ted Brasino. They are still asking the jurors whether they agree on the acquittal of Tim Wind. They all agree. They are nodding, and they said yes. Now they are moving on to Theodore Brasino, who, as many of you may remember, is the officer who at one point tried to stop the beating. In the Simi Valley trial, Ted Brasino turned against the others. In this trial, it was a united front. Now the verdict. Not guilty. That was somewhat expected. Not guilty of excessive force. Not guilty of using unreasonable force against Rodney King. Now we'll see whether he is not guilty of aiding and abetting. 2 acquittals. This is a split verdict. Theodore Brasino, not guilty. Tim Wind, not guilty. Stacy Kuhn, guilty of intentionally allowing unreasonable force during arrest. And Lawrence Powell, guilty of using unreasonable force, but not guilty of aiding and abetting. You got that? That's it.
Now, Judy, Brasino and Wind, I gather, were the 2 most marginally involved in this all along. In fact, some people had referred to them as phantoms during the trial. The focus seemed to be so much on Stacy Kuhn and Lawrence Powell.
Certainly the prosecution had the very best case against Lawrence Powell and Stacy Kuhn.
Judy, what was...
Jurors are being polled now as to whether they're all in agreement. From the defense lawyer. The defense lawyers wanted to know, especially Stone, who is Lawrence Powell's attorney, wants them polled on how they voted on Kuhn and Powell, and they're doing that now. But go ahead, Barry, with your questions.
Judy, what reaction was there in the courtroom, especially from the defendants as these verdicts were read?
Well, this is the dilemma I face, because I needed to get this to you quickly. I am down in the press room and cannot see the reactions. We will have that reaction
I see, all right.
from Ron Claiborne, who is in the courtroom, and you're going to have to wait a little bit for that. But we wanted to get these verdicts to you as they were happening. This is the only way to do it, since there's no audio equipment allowed in the courtroom.
All right, thanks very much, Judy. ABC's Tom Foreman is standing outside the courthouse now in Los Angeles. Tom, what reaction is there out there?
If there is any measure of what happened inside the courtroom or what people felt in there out here, there was a huge cheer when the guilty verdicts came down from the people who gathered here. There's an awful lot more media here than there are local people, but the local people who were here just screamed out with delight as the guilty verdicts came down. There were a couple of people yelling no a bit when the not guilty verdicts came down, but that was fairly limited. More, there was this just roar of approval when the guilty verdicts came down. There's some people right now who are briefly speaking to the media and saying that they're obviously pleased about that. If this is any measure of how the community feels, it makes a big difference, obviously, because in several days, as we've been around the streets here, an awful lot of people have not expected guilty verdicts. An awful lot of people have said that they wanted them very badly, but after the first trial, they really didn't expect them. So just as the first trial was a surprise when everyone expected guilty verdicts and did not get them, this time it seems to be a surprise to the public because a lot of people didn't expect anyone to be found guilty. In fact, some officers have been found that way. Barry?
All right, thanks very much, Tom. Let's find out what kind of surprise this was to a legal expert, Peter Aranella. He's a criminal law professor at UCLA and also a consultant with ABC News. He's standing by in our Los Angeles bureau. Professor Aranella, what do you think? Are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised, Barry, but it was certainly true that many legal observers, myself included, thought that the government might have a difficult time proving the intent element. But I think when all was said and done that this jury ultimately used their own ordinary common sense in looking at that videotape and concluded that given the degree of brutality that was involved and given the minor resistance being offered by King after the first 30 seconds, that these officers must have been aware that they were using more force than needed, and therefore that they had the intent to use excessive force. In short, I think the prosecution sold the story they had tried to, which was that this was a case of street justice in which the police were angered at King for resisting their lawful authority and basically punished him to teach him a lesson.
It had been said all along, Professor Arenello, that this would be more difficult because it was not just a matter of showing what happened, but also proving intent. Apparently the prosecution succeeded in half its arguments anyway.
Well, I think that's right, and I also am pleased to see the jury discriminate between these defendants. The government's case against Officer Brazino was almost non-existent, and indeed there was some speculation that if the judge had courage, he might have actually issued a directed verdict of acquittal against Brazino at the close of the government's case. So I know I'm gratified that this jury discriminated between the different defendants involved in this case.
Well, what do you think it was that made the difference this time, that produced at least 2 guilty verdicts this time as opposed to a year ago?
Well, the federal prosecutors in this case learned from the mistakes made by their state counterparts. They did not rely just on the videotape. They presented the testimony of civilian eyewitnesses, ordinary citizens, to describe the horror of that beating through the eyes of people that the jury could relate to. Second, they presented an expert on force, on reasonable force and what excessive force means to this jury in their case in chief. The state prosecutors did not do that. So the first expert to testify at the Simi Valley trial testified for the defense and in some sense defined the issue for the jury as one sympathetic to the defense perspective. Finally, you did have Rodney King take the stand and put a human face on that videotape. His testimony, I think, diffused the strategy that had worked at Simi Valley, which was to paint King in a very menacing manner and to basically send the message to the Simi Valley jury that King, in essence, got what he deserved. Finally, I just want to add that Officer Melanie Singer, who was called by a defense lawyer in this case, Powell's lawyer, and I think Melanie Singer's testimony hurt the defense very, very badly.
All right, Dr. Arenello, thanks very much. We'll get back to you. We'll go back now to ABC's Judy Muller in the courthouse where she was able to relay those verdicts to us as they were read. Judy, what's happened since?
Well, the judge is now thanking the jurors, Barry, and he said for their extraordinary sacrifice. He also said that the court order, which protects their privacy, will stay in effect for some time. He said if they would want to come forward and talk to the press, who he said is extraordinarily anxious to talk to them, they could do so, but that they may not be forced to do so, and there will be penalties if their names are disclosed. So they remain anonymous. He's asking them to remain in the jury room for a few moments. He also said that this was an extraordinarily well-tried case, and it was some of the best argument he's ever heard in a courtroom. And with that, everybody is now rising, and the jury is leaving the room, and that is it. The end of a long ordeal.
Thanks very much, Judy. We've made a number of references to the trial a year ago. That's the state trial in which all of these defendants were acquitted on charges of assault. The foreman of that jury was Mrs. Dorothy Bailey, and she's standing by now, I believe, in Salt Lake City. And Mrs. Bailey, what's your reaction to what you've heard this morning?
My reaction is that I think the jury did the job that they were put there to do, and I have great empathy for them.
What do you think this jury has gone through from your experience?
It's been a long, arduous ordeal for them, I'm sure, as it was for us, and I have much empathy for them. They're probably feeling very relieved now that the whole thing is over.
Well, Mrs. Bailey, what did they hear, what did they know, what did they believe that you didn't a year ago?
Not having been there, I can't say that. I have tried very hard to follow the trial as much as I can, getting the information that I have from the media. I do believe that the prosecution was a lot more aggressive this time. I believe their use of force expert was a great deal more effective than it was the last time. Melanie Singer's testimony was a lot more effective. Those are the things that I have gained simply from the media, but having not been there, I can say that only the jury can say that.
Does this give you any second thoughts in any sense about what happened a year ago?
Absolutely not, Barry. We made our decision based on the testimony that we received at that time, and I can't change that because our decisions were made on the testimony that we received and the evidence that we received at that time.
I know you've talked about this a little bit before, but just tell me what your life has been like since that trial.
There's been a lot of trauma, emotional trauma. The fact that the whole world was against the decision that we made was a little bit hard to bear. The jurors have had a lot of emotional and physical reactions to it. Right now I'm feeling relief that the whole thing is over, and I hope it is over, and I do hope that there are no repercussions as there were the last time, riots, etc. I'm hoping that.
All right, and we thank you very much, Dorothy Bailey. Thanks
you.
very much. To recap, in case you've joined us late, we have a split verdict in the trial of 4 Los Angeles police officers in connection with the beating of Rodney King 2 years ago. This is the federal civil rights trial in which all these officers were accused of violating Mr. King's civil rights by denying him due process through use of excessive force. Sergeant Stacy Kuhn, who supervised that evening, has been found guilty, as has Officer Lawrence Powell. Officer Theodore Brasenio and former Officer Timothy Wind have been found not guilty. Dorothy Bailey was talking a moment ago about hoping that there was no repeat of the kind of violence there was in Los Angeles a year ago. That has been very much on the mind of city officials, including Mayor Tom Bradley, who made his own appeal last night. Here's part of what he said.
Let's all take a deep breath. Let's all keep cool. We may all have our own idea of how this trial should turn out. But whatever the outcome, it is now time for Los Angeles, as a city, as a people, to look beyond this trial. We must turn our attention away from courtrooms and toward our children, toward our neighbors, and toward the challenges we face.
That was Mayor Tom Bradley. Now, word of today's split verdict has been spreading rapidly, as you might expect, in Los Angeles, including to all police officers, and nearly all of Los Angeles police officers are on the streets today. The verdict has actually been radioed to them, I'm told, in their cars, in their units, wherever they are around town. Police are on alert just in case. So far, everything has been calm, and everyone hopes it will stay that way. To see what the scene is now outside the courthouse in Los Angeles, we'll go back to ABC's Tom Foreman. Tom?
Barry, this has turned into an impromptu soapbox out here. A lot of people are getting up now and addressing the crowd here. Largely what they're talking about is that this is what should have happened all along. Obviously, I suppose they would have liked to have seen more guilty verdicts, but in this case, they're pleased that they got some of them. And that may make a big difference in this town. Out on the street, so many people in the past few days have been talking about trying to keep things calm, and that has been predicated on the notion that there would not be any guilty verdicts. So with these guilty verdicts, certainly there is jubilation here. There are people here who feel that this justifies what they have said all along, and they are clearly feeling in a celebratory mood, but not in the dangerous mood that people were in last year after the verdicts. That can make a big difference to police out there who are trying to keep things quiet, and to citizens out there who are trying to keep things quiet. We'll obviously have to see how that shakes down throughout the day. Right now, the speeches here are all about the way the justice came about, in a way that people have been waiting for quite some time here.
Tom, have you seen anyone outside who was in the courtroom this morning?
No, nobody is out as of yet that was inside, as far as I can tell. There's quite a large crowd here, Barry. It's sort of hard to keep track of where everyone is. Although a lot of the people here reacting to this are people who have followed this case very closely and who have been here day after day trying to see what would happen. Many of them just interested citizens, but people who are so interested and concerned about their community that they wanted to be here and wanted to react to this.
All right, and we noted earlier that Los Angeles police are on alert, although everything appears to be calm. I gather nearly every member of the LA police force is out on the streets.
That's a pretty good assessment of it. You could see it last night. I was riding around in Koreatown, and there were an awful lot of police officers on the street. There were parking lots where you'd see them gathered in large groups and then dispersing to go out and look throughout the area. As I understand it, they have some working arrangements where, by having so many officers on the street, they can quickly and easily converge a lot of officers on any area where there might be trouble. As you remember, last year, one of the big complaints was that when the police responded, they responded too slowly with not enough people, and they were unable to control any of the violence or even contain it, keep it in one area. This year, they seem intent on keeping that from happening by having, as you put it, almost all the officers on the street, plus having the National Guard standing by.
All right, thanks very much. ABC's Tom Foreman in Los Angeles. Just to recap now, the jury in the Rodney King civil rights trial this morning has returned guilty verdicts against 2 of the 4 Los Angeles police officers charged in connection with the beating. Sergeant Stacy Kuhn, who supervised that beating, and Officer Lawrence Powell, who administered most of the blows in that now famous videotaped assault. They were both found guilty. 2 other officers were acquitted today. We'll have more reports later today when and if events warrant, and we'll certainly have a complete report on this and all the rest of today's news on ABC's World News Saturday. In Washington, I'm Barry Serra from ABC News. Good morning.
This has been a special report from ABC News. We now join the Bugs Bunny and Tweety show.